bridges. Another of my favorite stories around creative constraints and constraints driving creativity is the story of the Mars Pathfinder, the rover. Are you familiar with this story? Interestingly enough, they put a rover successfully on Mars and beamed back scientific information successfully for less than it cost James Cameron to produce the movie The Titanic. Now that's a feat. NASA said to Jet Propulsion Laboratory down in Pasadena, California, in the early 1990s, they adopted something called smarter, faster, better, cheaper, smarter. The previous Viking mission was a $2 billion fiasco. They said, you've got a tenth of the budget and half the time to put a rover on Mars. And they did it. And those constraints drove an entirely different kind of individual to manage the project. It drove an entirely different kind of team makeup, people that rose to that kind of challenge, that viewed constraints and resource constraints as the very spur for innovation and creativity. And the most innovative thing that they did, because they didn't have the budget to actually use jet propulsion to land the thing, was what you see here. What did they use to land the Mars Pathfinder, those of you that know the story? Balloons. Balloons. Technology in existence? Yeah, where? Automobiles. Automobiles. Young 25-year-old designer was put in charge of landing the rover, or landing the Pathfinder on Mars. And over countless experiments and tests and prototypes, what you see here is the mock-up of that, and that really sort of changed the face of space exploration and Mars expeditions, and really paved the way for some of the success that just recently we've had. And one of my favorite stories is, and I'm sure that this only really resonates with people in California, right? But what you're looking at is what? In-N-Out Burger. And what do we know about In-N-Out Burger? The secret menu, right? You know what? This is the menu as it appeared in 1948, when the Snyders invented the drive-through burger stand, right, down in Los Angeles in Baldwin Park. 4 food items and a beverage. They've never changed it, because subtraction doesn't necessarily mean the removal of something. It can also mean not adding something. And they have not added anything to the menu. Who has? Everyone else. Customers. They have done the innovating. And that restraint has led to a couple of things. One, this secret menu that's got 4 dozen items on it, right? The Flying Dutchman, the animal style, the protein style, you name it. Tony Hsieh, Zappos, in 2004, took a team of 6 to the one in Las Vegas. You know what they ordered? A 100 by 100. You know what that is, right? It's 100 patties and 100 slices of cheese. 20,000 calories. And they consumed it in 2 hours because, and this is a reference to a past law. There's only one rule that they use. We'll do anything you want to a burger, basically, right? As long as it's going to be a good burger, we'll do whatever you want to it. I'm trying to get one through the menu system. And what's really fascinating to me about this? It's not like Starbucks, where you go to Starbucks and there's already an extensive menu, and you order a tall, extra hot, 4-pump, no whip mocha, and the receipt still reads TL Mocha, right? You order a Flying Dutchman at In-N-Out Burger, what's on your receipt? Flying Dutchman. They've standardized the creativity of their customers. It's sort of fascinating from that angle. I'm trying to get a reverse double twist. I have them put the bun upside down, so it's got the flat part out, toasted, and cheese in the middle. So burger, cheese, burger, reverse double twist. That's my concoction. But creativity thrives under intelligent constraints. All the best stories that we love, of the Googles, of the Apples of the world, where do they begin? Physically. Not geographically, physically. Where do they always begin? In the garage. Why? Because it's like, that's where guys like to hang out? Well, maybe, but more importantly, what don't you have when you start out like that? Money, people, space, right? You got an idea, you got a good idea that's going to change the world, you got a passion for it, the money follows. But interestingly enough, when you get into a very successful, larger organization, you know what the first question people ask when you ask them to innovate, what's my budget? What's my budget? I don't have the resources to innovate. But all of the good innovations, all the great curve-jumping innovations happen at the hands of resource constraints. And design lesson number 5. Break is the important part of breakthrough. Now, there are 2 different kinds of break. There are the kind that you make, and that there are the kind that you take. So let me talk about the first kind for a bit. I'm going to go down a tangent after that, come back to the second kind of break, and that'll conclude our discussion. You ever been to a Zen garden? Rock garden? It's fascinating because you say to yourself, how did they do that? Where are the footsteps? Right? How did they do that? This is an example of a Zen design aesthetic. Are you familiar with the 7 design aesthetics, Zen design aesthetics? One of them being Datsuzoku. Datsuzoku. After this, look up the 7 design aesthetics of Zen. And it means break from routine. It means interruption of convention, interruption of normalcy. And it's a good example because what's breaking up what here? Which lines are breaking up the other lines? It's hard to tell. And that's that whole yin-yang kind of thing. But the notion of making a break is part and parcel to how some of our best inventions happen, especially in larger organizations. Are you familiar with the term skunk works? Yeah? Where's it come from? Do you know? Anyone know the genesis of skunk works? Aviation, and specifically Lockheed. Okay, Lockheed. I don't know if you know the story of this, but this has really paved the way, I think, for how entrepreneurship often happens structurally in organizations. It's very difficult because of the exigencies of the day and running a current operation unless you somehow separate yourself. But it was 1943. A quick history lesson. 1943, and that's the year. Excuse me. That's the year that the first jet fighter planes appeared. And they appeared in the skies over Germany. And all of a sudden, the War Department said, we just got curve jumped. We need because all our planes are the P-38, the prop planes. If you look at World War II footage, pretty much the plane that you see all over the place is the Lockheed P-38, and designed and built in Burbank, California in the late 30s. 1940s. And the War Department knocked on the door of Lockheed in 1943, and they were looking for a certain designer/engineer by the name of Clarence Kelly Johnson. He was a bit of a maverick, sort of looked a little bit like W.C. Fields, and he had designed the P-38, and they gave him a challenge that really piggybacked off that last law. We need a working prototype of a jet fighter in about 6 months. You got 180 days to build this thing and get it up and running. Well, fine, but he said, we don't have the resources to do that. Specifically, the space resources, because Lockheed was churning 24/7 the propeller fighter planes that they were manufacturing. And so what he did was to make a break from the main facility. And he took 30 or so of the best designers and engineers with him, and he went down the road a click, and he rented a circus tent and set up shop. Unfortunately, it was right next to a plastics factory, which smelled awful. But it was perfect for him because that was a time where in our culture where we suspected everyone. And he didn't want, the nosy barkers coming around. This was a top secret project, complete autonomy to do this thing. And it made people, it was reminiscent of the Little Abner cartoon. Because in Little Abner, there was something called the Skunk Works, S-K-O-N-K. It was this dilapidated factory on the edge of Dogpatch, and they brewed who knows what. And one day, one of the engineers answered the phone, Skunk Works. And it made Kelly Johnson angry, but it stuck, and it stuck, and it stuck. And the whole operation became known as Skunk Works. And Little Abner publishers took offense to that. And so they had to change the name to Skunk Works. This is the actual Skunk Works building. It is, I've tried to get in it. You can't get in it. It is secret. It's out by Edwards Air Force Base, and the skunk is the logo. there, but it has paved the way. For example, this is the same strategy that Steve Jobs used when he broke away from Apple and started the Macintosh division, right? Just down the road a little bit. Took the best designers and holed up and did a skunkworks operation. Sometimes you've got to break the pattern. Break the pattern in the brain, break the pattern in the organization. So those 5 allow me to tell you what an elegant solution is. In my words, an elegant solution is one that achieves the maximum effect with the minimum means. Maximum effect with the minimum means, characterized by uncommon simplicity and surprising impact. And if you need a visual metaphor, it's a diamond. It's made of the simplest components, the simplest elements in the world. It happens only under special conditions and over a long period of time. When you take a raw diamond and want to create a gem, as you see here, it requires not the addition of material, but the very careful, very precise, very intelligent subtraction of material. It's sustainable. Diamonds are forever. It's literally cutting edge, and it pretty much ends every argument known to man. That much I know. So that's what an elegant solution, and that leads me to the second part of the question that I wanted to answer. How do you implement 1 million elegant solutions a year? And why would I say 1 million? Well, this happens to be the number of ideas that Toyota back in the day, I don't know what the current number is, but when I was kicking around there, this is the number of ideas that they were implementing every year. 1 million ideas. Most of them tiny, most of them tweaks, not all of them curve jumping for sure. But that seems like a very, very large number. But if you do the math, it's not that large. 250,000 people working for Toyota all across the planet, 4 ideas per person, basically, 1 per quarter. If you can get an organization, and you think about this going forward, if you can get any organization, get every individual in that organization to run 1 experiment, run 1 test, do 1 prototype a quarter, you're on to something. No one will catch you if you're able to do that, but it's very, very difficult to do. It requires a certain kind of culture, a certain definition of innovation. And so let me test this with the crowd, because this is what you're working on. Raise your hand if you consider yourself to be a good problem solver. Yeah, most everyone, right? You've probably solved 1 million problems today. Learners? Pretty much everyone. True innovators? Yeah, why is that, though? Why? I mean, everyone's hand goes up on their problem solving. Everyone's hand goes up on their learning. Why are we so shy to raise a hand or two there? Because it's how we think about innovation. And be careful of this. Innovation isn't about innovations. It's not about gadgets and gizmos. It's about the human creativity. It's about the input. It's about the process used to generate those gadgets and gizmos. It goes back to that notion of people don't want a product or solution. They don't want the fancy shovel. They want the hole in the ground. And we forget that. We get caught up in gadgets and gizmos. But what really gets in the way, I think, is how you're thinking about innovation. And you need to define it so that everyone can think about themselves as an innovator. Everyone's hands should go up, because the iterative process, as you know, behind good problem solving and good learning from the standpoint of creating new knowledge is the same as innovation. Is it not? And my favorite definition, I stole attribution to David Neilman for creating something that I think is so dirt simple but so relevant. Innovation is figuring out a way to do something better than it's ever been done before. That refers to the process. Everything else is scope, scale, magnitude. Right? The biggest idea, fine. Smallest idea, the process used to generate them is essentially the same. But if you define innovation this way, could you raise your hand if you consider yourself an innovator? There we go. That's better. I feel better. I can rest at ease. All right, so a couple of points to make before I bring us to the last lesson. Beware of the 4 temptations of the innovator. There are 4 of them. Be very careful of them. And I call them temptations because they're traps. They're traps that are so easy to fall into, especially in larger organizations. The first one is, I'll call, it's the home run mentality. It's swinging for fences. This is when the only thing that you care about is jumping the curve. It's changing the game. It's disrupting business. That's the only thing you care about, and you don't care about the curve itself, where you're constantly trying to improve. But the home, I mean, this is our Western mentality. Gosh, don't we love the Grand Slam home run? And don't we love the 3 points at the buzzer? And don't we love the hole-in-one? And don't we love the Hail Mary pass at the very end that wins the ball game? It's sexy. It gets on the news. And everybody tries to emulate that. But think about it. Home run hitters. You know any ball clubs that have an entire roster full of home run hitters? I don't. And what do you know about the home run hitters that they do have with respect to their batting average and strikeout rate? Batting average isn't all that great, and their strikeout rate tends to be higher. Well, in business, that translates to high carrying costs and large risk, all of which you do not want, certainly during economic times like these. But that's the first temptation. Another temptation is getting too clever. Getting too clever. And I think maybe even the venerable Apple might be guilty of this. Getting too clever is the bells and whistles trap. This is when we lose sight of exactly what our customers want, need, and require, even if it's unmet and unvoiced. And we start looking down the road at what the competitor's doing. And they've got this feature, and they've got that bell, and that whistle, and oh my gosh, they're a smart company. We should do the same. Apple did it with the iPhone. Now we've got all, right, smartphones that have no keyboard. And they great video, great pictures, great music, but could it just hold a call once in a while would be great. The primary value-adding feature of that supposedly smartphone, how smart is it? And they've begun to add recently the new iPhone 5, a little bit bigger, right? It's got a non-standard charger connector that we got to pay $29 for. So you got to be careful of the bells and whistles trap, and do this when you get home, or if you got a computer here, open up Microsoft Word and get all your toolbars out in the open. Get them all out. Everything that you've never used, never seen before, and look at how much space is left on your screen for the primary value-adding function of Microsoft Word, which is to create a written document. So be careful of that as a temptation. Be careful of solving problems frivolously. What do I mean by that? Ideas for ideas' sake aren't good. It needs to be tied to the real world and to the work that you do. When you get into an organization, it does not work to say those people down the road need to solve this problem. If you don't own the problem, then you can't be part of the solution. Solving problems frivolously means trying to attack things that you're not in control of and don't have either the resources or the responsibility for actually improving. Be careful of that. It's the fancy suggestion box. I see it all the time. Companies love to show me their idea management system. And I say, can I see the actual ideas? Can you show me what's in there? Yeah, it's a great system, right? I don't care what it is, SharePoint, whatever you want to call it, right? But can you show me the content of those ideas? You know what generally they are? Fancy complaints. They're suggestions for someone else to solve. Fancy complaints, right? An idea in the Toyota world was something that you recognized in your work that you were doing every day, and you could tweak your golf swing, metaphorically speaking. There was something that you could do to make that situation better. You defined the current situation, you defined the future situation, what's possible, you identified that gap, you identified why it existed, and your possible alternatives and ideas for closing that gap, and a plan to test out your idea. That's the definition of an idea, not a suggestion for someone else to solve. And the reason that I have a picture of money bags here is because it's what I already alluded to, the notion of resources. But people always ask me, how do you incentivize people to produce ideas and solutions? And I say, why would you ever need to do that? It comes naturally. All we do in our organizations is get in the way of it, right? I ask you, and how many people here play softball or golf or tennis? Raise your hand if you have some sort of avocation like that. Why do you do that? You get paid to do it? No, why do you do it? Because it's fun. It's fun. And we, by and large, want to improve and tweak our ability, whatever it is, because that's fun as well. And what we do when we get into organizations is put speed bumps in the way of that. And all of a sudden, we think we need to incentivize people. And all that really does is shut down creativity because it's unsustainable. People will stop submitting their ideas and participating in the act of ideation if the only thing that you attach to it is some sort of financial reward. I've seen it happen. I see it happen in my daughter's school. They want to get everybody reading, so they give them coupons to Taco Bell, right? And so everybody starts reading lots of books, and in order to get more coupons, what kind of books do you read? The quick ones, right? The fluffy ones. And all of a sudden I've got 10 books and 10 coupons. Then the teacher runs out of money and then nobody reads anymore. Right? So be careful of that. And really it's the notion of, and gosh, you guys are in such a great space here, and it just looks like you have so much fun. It's thinking and learning like children, observing, experimenting, and playing. And that really is that's how we come into the world, and we need to get back to that. And it's difficult to do, especially that first part. We love to jump to solutions. It's the primary thing that gets in the way of good ideas. And I learned something from Ben Hamilton Bailey, who was that urban space designer that I mentioned earlier that was responsible for Exhibition Road. He said, if we observe first, design second, we wouldn't need most of the things that we build. But it's so difficult to do. Let me test this with you and see how quickly it works. This is an incorrect Roman numeral equation, right? Remember your Roman numerals? Certainly 11 plus 1 doesn't equal 10. What's the least number of sticks if the Roman numerals are made up of movable sticks, and leaving the plus sign and equal sign alone, don't touch them? What's the least number of sticks you need to move to make it a correct equation? Shout it out. Yeah, wrong. Wrong. See, that's called satisficing. You see, we see the obvious solution and we glom onto it. Think carefully about the question I just asked. What's the ideal or optimal answer to what's the least number of sticks you need to move? Would be what? What's the ideal? 0. 0. You wouldn't have to move anything. Is there a way you can get there? Look at it upside down. That's what a good designer does, right? That's why you do what the Japanese call genchi genbutsu, which is get out and go look, go see. Look at the problem from all angles, especially that of the user. Look at it upside down. You don't need to do anything. Or you could flash it in the mirror because there's symmetry involved. So it's very, very difficult to do, and it sort of leads me to the last lesson, this notion of doing nothing, and that is the last lesson. Doing something isn't always better than doing nothing. And the reason I have a picture of a hippopotamus here is because I learned a very valuable lesson when I was speaking years ago on the same panel as a gentleman by the name of Boyd Matson. And he taught me a very valuable lesson, which is stand still when the hippos charge. Pretty elegant solution. 2,000-pound beast is barreling full speed at you. Do nothing. If you run, you're dead. Right? And you're certainly not going to kill it with any gun that you can actually carry. You're dead if you don't do if you do anything. I don't know how he figured that out, but it's a very, very important lesson because we all have a 2,000-pound beast barreling down at us. Maybe it's our workload, maybe it's our schoolwork, maybe it's getting a job, maybe it's our competitor. Whatever it is, sometimes doing nothing is the best thing that you can do, which flies in the face of conventional wisdom. But a consulting firm by the name of Boston Consulting Group tried this out. They ran an experiment for a few years with some of their consulting teams. And consultants, man, they're 120-hour people. They hate not working. They think they're missing out on something if they're not working. But they mandated one night off scheduled each week where you could have absolutely no communication with your team, via email, via phone, via BlackBerry, no work. They wanted you to stop working entirely. And this made the consultants hugely nervous. They thought they would have to work harder on the weekends. They thought they'd miss out on the good projects. They thought that they would have to make up that time somehow. But just the opposite was proven. Their work product improved based on what clients said. Their intra-team communication worked better. Their solutions were better because they were able to stop and reflect on their work. And it wasn't just go, go, go. They've now rolled it out as a firm-wide strategy. Doing nothing can be quite powerful. And it's very difficult to do. If I were to tell you right now, do nothing, you'd be hard-pressed to do it unless you were for some reason disciplined in something like meditation, where you're actually able to make yourself stop thinking and take that break. But that's the other break. First was making the break and then taking the break. And whether it's meditation, whether it's long language showers, whether it's traveling, whether it's long hikes, don't all of our best ideas seem to come when we're not thinking about the problem? Don't we get that aha moment when we've divorced ourselves or distanced ourselves a bit? We've steeped ourselves in a really wicked problem and it's just not working. and I go and I drive, or I hike, or I ride a bike, and kaboom, the answer appears. That's because you cannot speed up what happens in the hippocampus. It has its own agenda. And quite frankly, the connections are made when the other part of your brain function, the non-executive part, is engaged. So that's design lesson number 6. So here are the lessons. They are the laws of subtraction. What isn't there can often trump what is. The simplest rules create the most effective experience. Limiting information engages the imagination. Creativity thrives under intelligent constraints. Break is the important part of breakthrough. Doing something isn't always better than doing nothing. And I'll leave you with a couple of quotes. People always say, no, well, you're just talking about simplicity. I go, well, yeah, I am, but there's 2 brands of simplicity. And to build on Oliver Wendell Holmes's quote here, there's simplicity on this side of complexity, and there's simplicity on the other side of complexity. He wouldn't give a fig for near side simplicity, but he'd give his life for far side simplicity, which means you have to appreciate complexity, you have to know how to exploit it and manage it and make it invisible to your user. It's the difference between chess and checkers, both played on the same board, both have the same number of players. One is far more what? What's chess? If you had to come up with one word that defines the difference between chess and checkers, it is strategy. Strategy, which is what you're here to study, right? And is the checkers. I played with my daughter since she was 4. It's about single moves. It's about addition. It's about capturing the other person's army, right? Chess is about the minimum number of moves to immobilize a single piece. You have to think 1, 2, 3, 4 moves in advance. And oftentimes, if you were to watch a chess match in action, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but what do you see them doing? Nothing, right? Nothing apparent, but they're thinking. It's far more strategic. And the very last thing I have for you is one of the more inspiring videos that, and I always show it just because I just love it. So I'll leave you with this.
I think about the way that they portray creativity and work in movies is always so funny. There's the shots of the guy, he's sitting and thinking, and then he's working hard, and then he drinks the coffee, and the sun goes down and comes back up, and then boom, they've collapsed a year of work or whatever it is down into one little montage. And I think that sort of helps to create this false impression that it happens really fast. It doesn't.
Usually people are inspired, they have a need, a problem, or something that sparks their interest, and the seed of an idea is planted.
I used to keep a pad of paper next to my bed because I had this fear, neuroses, that if I didn't write down the idea when I had it, it would be gone. It would never come back again.
When I get an idea, if it's something that I truly want to see succeed, it is all-consuming.
I think anybody can have a good idea. They just need to be brave enough to recognize it when they've had the idea, because the chances are they already have.
I think a good idea has 2 main characteristics. 1, it's impactful, and 2, it's inspiring.
Some of the best ideas, I think, come from talking with other people about things. If you've heard of this idea that when 2 minds are getting together and talking about something, kind of a third mind develops, and out of that comes some of the best ideas that people get.
The life for every idea is going to be a little bit different. Some are going to be longer, some are going to be shorter. In most cases, though, if an idea is really strong, it's going to make it through.
Everyone who's accomplished anything great has failed. It's just part of the creative process. And for every time you succeed, you're probably going to have 10 failures.
Once you get an idea, you prototype it. You build a little something that kind of resembles or best communicates the essence of what you're trying to make or build.
I've always found that if you're persistent, it's one of the most important things and one of the things that pays off in the end. If you keep trying and you keep working at something that you're doing, eventually people take notice and you get the support that you need.
Carrying an idea from inception to actual tangible product is very hard. It requires self-discipline that people aren't really encouraged to have these days. People probably carry good ideas with them all the time, but they don't recognize them for what they are.
There is always going to be resistance, but the people who are truly impassioned, they're immune from that. They're almost to the point of delusional. Delusional could be a positive or a negative. In my world, it's positive.
I think there are a lot of people who will tell you no in putting together a good idea. The trick is to only accept a no from someone who also has the power to say yes.
So, may that third mind develop while you're here and working with your team. May you only say, accept a no from someone with the power to say yes. And in your projects and in your work, try to remember this. When you remove just the right things in just the right way, something good happens. Thank you very much. So that was about hour 20 or so. So we've got some time left on the boards, right? So discussion, questions, ahas, wondering about anything. You're toasted, aren't you? It's like sipping from a fire hose, right? Sorry. Yeah, sure. I mean, I put these 6 little laws in a book coming out in October, and the couple interesting things about this book is it's got about 54 contributors. Some of the most brilliant people I know contributing little essays I call silhouettes on subtraction, how it's worked in their life. And as a pre-order incentive, I've got a little playbook that's free. You can find it on my website, and you send me a receipt of ordering it. I'll send you that PDF. It's got exercises, it's got resources, it's got links, it's got things to do, all aligned to these 6, sort of a self-driven seminar in a box, and it's called A Box of Less. Yeah.
You said that you had done an MBA. I can't speak. You have an MBA.
I do. Yes.
What was your undergraduate degree in?
Social and behavioral sciences.
Thank you. Where'd you study?
Johns Hopkins undergrad and Wharton grad.
Finance.
Well, it was at the time it was more thought of as a finance school, but I think it was originally called the Wharton School of Finance back when it started. But the reason that I went there, and I got in pretty much everywhere I applied, I'll be honest, the reason I went there is pass-fail grading. I figured if I can't pass the course, then so yeah.
So my comment comes in 2 parts.
Okay.
The first part is you've already done your job, in my opinion, of presenting some ideas that are really strong, and I think people can walk away with. The second part is a question. I'm wondering, I was hoping to get a personal side to this, in terms of like a personal idea that you had, a failure and success with something you worked on. Because a lot of us, our day-to-day is in the details of our successes and failures. A lot of these ideas piggyback on geniuses, Steve Jobs, C.C. Meyer. People have done things in a big way, and a lot of your ideas talk about the inspirational aspect of a quote of this. Can you give us any kind of personal failure or success of a specific idea?
Yeah, my day job revolves around the kind of more mundane ideas. My day job is working with teams to track down solutions that are essentially subtractive in nature. And I could go chapter and verse on the mundane processes that still have a little aha in them. But if you want a personal, I'll be honest with you, I think the very first book I wrote there's nothing elegant about it. There's too many sidebars, there's too many grayed out areas, there's too much going on the page. I overcompensated in my second book. There's not enough going on. It was too narrative. It was too I don't know, wordy. It was, I could have said the same thing as I read back over it. I am far from a master of subtraction. I am a student of subtraction, and I'll forever be a student of subtraction. And I can tell you that my failures far outweigh my successes. And so, I mean, those are, hopefully this one corrects some of those things. But there's no, even I try and follow my own laws. It's very, very difficult to do. But by and large, my day job revolves around those things, and we essentially have more successes because we make things visual. We subtract information that's irrelevant, that's excessive. The steps are too many. There's too much stuff produced. So, I mean, I could probably share all kinds, and none of them would be really that great. But the book is. What artist loves their work? I don't know. I mean, really, as soon as something is produced, I can find a million ways that I think to myself, what was I thinking?
That irrelevant, deciding what is relevant, how do you manage
Yeah,
that?
I quite honestly have a practice, and I learned this working. I received a lot of benefits by working with an Asian organization. It is a completely different way of thinking. I was exposed to the Eastern mind working with Toyota, and I can tell you that emptiness is revered in that culture in a way that is not. My favorite word in Japanese is, and it's not because it's the only one I can pronounce correctly, but it's ma. It means blankness or emptiness. And it's okay to sit there across from someone and have silence. It's a hard thing to learn, but one of the practices that I learned is called hansei. Hansei. It means reflection, introspection. And what's interesting about hansei is, and what was difficult about that for me, is that it's done irrespective of performance. What do I mean by that? Here in the West, let's say you've got, anyone here have kids? Children? Okay, grade school, they come home with grades, right? Your child comes home with a, 2 D's, 2 B's, and an A. Generally what we do, is to high-five the A's. Hey, good job on the B's. What the heck happened with the D's? Get in your room and, do your homework, whatever it is, right? And we focus on that part. In Japanese culture, school children are taught at a very, very young age to perform hansei. And whether or not you got an A or you got a D, the process is the same. What did you expect to get in that class? What did you actually get? And what accounts for the difference? If you expected to get a C and you got an A, that is cause for reflection. Here in the West, when you exceed your expectations in the organizations, it's pop the champagne. It's not time for learning. But I remember when it was 2006, 2007, Toyota was all of a sudden the biggest car maker. They were very somber in the organization because their goal was by 2010 to have 15% of the market share. And here it was 2006, 2007, and they had already 17%. That was caused, because that's a gap. Whether it's overshooting or undershooting, it's a gap, and it's cause for learning. School children are taught that at a very young age. If you got a D, and you thought you were going to get an A, that's one side of it. If you thought you were going to utterly fail and you got a D, that's cause for learning. So it's irrespective of the outcome, is to look at the process that led to the result. So that is something that I have built into my daily activity. As a matter of fact, I probably have a mental list of about 23 things that I'm going to change about this particular presentation that I'll document, but I'll reflect on what it is I was trying to achieve in what kind of time and what kind of message, what didn't I say, what did I say, what worked based on the audience response, and I'll change that for next time. It's a daily routine that and a discipline that I use. And I also have learned, believe it or not, how to meditate. It's not traditional meditation. I do it in a few moments, but I do it very early in the morning as the first thing. So there are things that I've learned, but there are processes and disciplines and practices that help. Yeah.
Creativity from innovation.
Am I separating creativity? You know, I think a lot of people like to separate creativity and innovation, and I think that the definition, trying to separate them, I think is only useful perhaps academically. I don't even like to parse the two. One without the other, I mean, I don't know. What is I guess the question is, what's the value of separating the two? What do you gain by separating them? And I'm not sure that you gain a lot, except some sort of academic notion or scholarly notion of a difference. But I don't know if it's actually useful or practical in the real world. I mean, innovation could be applied creativity in a sense. You know, I don't know. That's sort of above my pay scale, I think, to even try and wrestle that one down to the ground. I don't know if that's a cop-out or not, but I don't even try and I don't even like to parse out the difference between design thinking and Six Sigma and lean thinking and PDCA and all of the other cognitive ways that we solve problems. To me, they're just sort of all different denominations in the church of customer value, and it's whatever works programmatically for you. I know for a fact that human beings only solve problems one way consciously, which is to ask a question, come up with a hypothesis for the answer, test it out, and learn from it. You see it I learned it from my daughter when she was in the high chair. How do I get the bowl of food on the floor, right? There's the question, right? Hypothesis A, tip it. Hypothesis B, spoon it. Hypothesis C, take a fistful and wing it, right? That's phase 2. She runs the tip experiment, and she gets all her great feedback, and lots of claps her hands. There's food everywhere. Mom gets really busy. She adopts it as her interim best practice, and as soon as Mom puts it back on there, she does like what every good scientist does, confirms her results, and that's what learning is all about. That's separate from the sudden insight kind of creativity, where all of a sudden the idea springs at us seemingly from nowhere. But now sort of we know that and they've proven what sets the stage for that. It's a certain kind of brain wave. It occurs in a certain region of the brain. And that's a different kind of problem solving, the sudden insight way, and then there's the conscious way, and they use different parts of your neuroscience. So I don't even like to try and separate that out too much. Yeah.
Question for you. I work in the medical device industry, which is highly regulated, and at first I thought, well, maybe it's easier to innovate in a place where you're not bounded by so many restrictions. But then I thought, making cars, there's a lot of regulation in that industry as well. How does Toyota look at regulation in the context of the innovation process?
It depends on the regulation. I mean, I can tell you the whole notion of CAFE standards. Are you familiar with the CAFE standards, the fuel emission standards that are coming down the pike? They don't react very kindly to. Other regulations are viewed as necessary and beneficial. So you have to actually look at the actual regulation. But by and large, I sort of align to the almost libertarian thing that you saw with the shared space design, coupled with the word that I had in there about constraints, which was a word. Remember the word? Intelligent constraints. Constraints because we are trying to control something for the sake of control, because it seems to be out of order, almost always generally backfires. And an example of that in the Toyota world, there are car companies that, for example, I know this for a fact because I've done work for them, that in a factory will have people trying to monitor absenteeism by hiding behind pillars with clipboards and monitoring comings and goings of people. Right? Compared to a Toyota, which says there are 2 basic values at play here. Violate them, and we'll tell you how you violate them simply by telling stories, but violate them and you get kicked off the island. Everything else is up to you. Respect for people, number 1, and continuous improvement, number 2. If you don't engage in those things, and respect for people meaning caring about someone, if you knowingly, for example, pass on something you know to be defective to the next person down the line, if you know that to be defective and you pass it on, you're gone, because it's the ultimate sign of disrespect. It says, basically, I don't care about you as a person. So 2 parts to the answer, or 2 parts to the question. The answers are, it depends on the regulation from both an industry perspective and an organizational one. On the organizational side of things, they tend to line up with fewer regulations and restrictions, and in favor of sort of that self-government, set the right context, allow the order to emerge, sort of like you saw in the people video there. If you set the right rules at a certain level, symmetry happens. It seems like chaos, but it really isn't. So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer or not. I have done work in banking, which is fraught with regulation, and I can tell you that across the board it tends to stifle because of this is so onerous. The rules and regulations, it tends to stifle innovation. I would tell you, though, that my view would be like the whole economic thing and all that happened with the housing industry. What if we had just said, at your own risk? And, rather than try and regulate it, like in traffic controls, we think someone else is taking care of all the downside risk for us, and so we don't read everything. But when you make the risk apparent, we can make intelligent decisions. We're smart people, right? We don't, as Ben Hamilton Bailey would tell me, you don't need a sign in your living room that says no spitting on the floor, right? You don't need to do that. People are intelligent, and the context provides pretty much all the rules that you need. So if you have something that's transparent and you can see the risk, good things happen and bad things don't. So that's my own personal perspective.
Is the back of the book as clean, or was it Microsoft?
You don't know how I had to. I wish I could show you the original iteration of the cover. It was nothing like this. This was a fight tooth and nail to get it, and I'm quite happy with the way it turned out. This is going to be foil, a red foil, so that's kind of cool. It's a subtle minus sign, so I liked that. So I liked what the designers did, but it was a fight. And I also had to fight for the back of the book because traditional books like you to have blurbs, right? So some known person somewhere says this is the greatest book since the last book I blurbed. And so I fought that, and there are no blurbs on the back. What is on the back are little excerpts from the personal essays that people contributed to the book. So they're actually valuable. They're value adding. So yeah.
Either thought about or come across a subtractive political system?
No, and people are asking me to write about it right now too, like with respect to the candidates, and I'm hard pressed to do it. I sort of manufactured a response to some of the things that Ryan said initially. I thought he was a little bit of a man of subtraction. It's turning out to be not necessarily the case. But government, I think they're almost mutually exclusive, aren't they? Those two terms, subtraction and government. Now I have in the government of a company, but you're talking about political systems, right? Countries and things like that. No, and I'm not versed enough to even speak remotely intelligently on that. But the answer is no. Have you? No. Has anyone? Yeah?
What about the Gulag? Sinister, but subtractive.
How about Costa Rica without it?
Yeah, I don't know. I've been to Costa Rica. And while they don't have a lot, may not have an army, they sure got a lot of guys with guns walking around some of the towns. It's kind of scary. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Thinking as a fun experiment, what would you recommend us to subtract for life starting tomorrow?
What would I recommend you subtract from your life?
Starting tomorrow as a fun experiment.
You have to go to class.
Well, I couldn't provide a solution that would work for you, but I would tell you that there are a couple of questions that you can always ask yourself, which goes something like this. What would those closest to me love for me to stop doing? And what would those closest to me or that I really care about love for me to stop doing? What would my competitors hate if I were to stop doing? Those kinds of questions. And ask yourself, and generally speaking, do the design thinking thing. People are generally open to telling you what you ought to stop doing if you ask them. They're pretty they'll tell you. And I've learned being married for a few dozen years, there's a big difference between telling someone how they should be a better partner and saying you've got a suggestion for how you could be a better partner. It's push and pull. It's push and pull. But ask others what to subtract. If you're not certain of what you subtract, think of your customer. And everyone's got a customer. Everyone has somewhere, there's someone that's going to be in receipt of what you do or what you provide. They're generally, if you ask them in the right way, they're generally open to telling you what should not be there. So, what would others love for me to stop doing? What would those closest love for me to stop doing? What would those who can't stand me, hate if I were to stop doing? Those kinds of things. So ask it from the other angle, the other perspective. Look at the Roman numeral equation from a different angle.
Culture, you talk about like addition being a huge part of it. Like we create more regulations for ourselves because we see something wrong, so we add regulations. So I see where you're coming from, and I agree with it. That's a great idea, but the propensity within our culture is to add things, to keep adding on top of it. So how do you address this to a larger audience, and not necessarily a product? But intelligent constraints is something you talk about. So is there a balance between intelligent constraints and subtraction? Or is it just about subtraction? That makes any sense?
No, it does. I mean, but, I think you're asking how do you implement this in the real world? Yeah. Very slowly, very organically, one team at a time. And it's easier to start from a clean sheet or in a green field and restrain from adding things than it is to go into an organization or a situation where you've already got all this and start subtracting things, because you run the risk of doing willy-nilly kinds of simplistic cuts, which flies in the face of what subtraction is all about. It's about elegance. It's about the maximum effect with the minimum means. And so the only thing that I have found to work in the 6 years or so since I've left Toyota, and interestingly enough, I just started working with them last month again, is that you start in one spot that seems to be receptive to it, and you can tell that quite easily with just a couple of questions. And if you find a pocket of receptivity, you start there, and you take an idea through fruition using the processes that you're learning here, the ideation and the prototyping and the testing and the feedback. And if it's successful, you spread a little light and a little water, and you shine that light consistently, and then people start peeking over the cubicle wall and go, well, you guys are sort of engaged. What's going on over there? And whether you're talking about a government, whether you're talking about a larger organization, that's where I always start. I'll never forget Wells Fargo coming to me saying, we'd like to send 600 people through lean thinking. No, you really don't want to do that. We'll start with one team, see if that kind of cooking works in your kitchen. I don't know your kitchen well enough to suggest 600 of anything. Let's see if it works in that environment, in that culture. If it does, we'll go from there. But that's how you do it. And I think that change, by and large, unless it comes from the top with a light switch change, and that person is in absolute control, which doesn't happen very frequently. It can only really happen, I think, in smaller organizations and teams where you've got utter control at the top and they want to flip that switch and change the culture right away. You start very slowly, you start very organically, and you go from there, and you spread it. The best antidote is to get out of your head, get out of the building, and live the life of those that are going to be in receipt of whatever it is you're going to eventually deliver. If you don't look at things from their perspective and their world, you will fail. You'll succumb to the designer mindset of "Isn't this cool?" The engineering mindset of "Wow, that's really cool." But case in point, how many of you are active Instagrammers? Do you know what the first iteration of Instagram looked like? Do you? Was fraught with features. Was fraught with features, and they pared it back to be dirt simple, and that's what made that company really, really spring up. So it's by looking at users and what they use, what they don't use, what they hate, and it's not enough to ask them. And that's another thing. We love to just ask and interview, but you really can't do that because for a number of reasons. And it can't be necessarily in a sterile environment. And you know this, right? You got to get out there and become the customer, infiltrate them, play undercover cop, become the criminal, if you will. It's what the Lexus designers at Toyota did. They lived a Tony lifestyle in Laguna Beach in the late 1980s to understand the luxury customer. Luxury home, all the best cars, best restaurants. Talked to the people that served rich people, became rich people. Only criminals lived that way in Japan. They had to become the luxury buyer. That's the best antidote. Is to really get out there among those that are going to use it and get that feedback in a real world way. So it's not just enough to ask because customers are fickle, users are fickle. They'll tell you one thing, they'll change their mind. They don't know how to express it in the first place. So you can't just take them at face value, and a good designer knows that. A good designer really has to get out there and really get that kind of real world observation, empathy. If you will. So, and luckily things are changing. I think the people are waking up to the fact that you got to do that. The competition is too great otherwise, and it's easier to fail faster now. Design cycles and product cycles are shorter. The technology is good. You can test things out. The whole lean startup idea is a great. If you're not familiar with the lean startup, it's a great way of turning the Toyota production system into entrepreneurial startup kinds of things for new teams. But yeah. What drives people to add things and what motivates them to add? A lot of it is how we're hardwired. When I say hardwired, I mean by evolution. From our days on the savannah, as hunters and gatherers, that's what is inbred in us, is to gather things. Slack resources make us feel safe. Cushions make us feel safe. More seems to make us feel safer, and it's hard to wean ourselves from that unless you look at other cultures that have grown up in environments where, for instance, humility, like in Asian culture, humility is a very big part of their culture, and it's sort of a no-no to be ostentatious, to accumulate things. So, but that's, I think, is part of it. It's cultural, it's biological. Trust me, if this was easy, if it was easy, I wouldn't be up here talking about it. Nothing to talk about. Okay, yeah, it's 9 o'clock. Get to work. Thank you.